I just want to ask you one more question about your record, though, sir. You were the first American Secretary of State to ever meet with the Taliban, and you talked about how they had agreed to join us in the fight against terrorism. Here you are, sir.
The gentleman I met with agreed that they would break that relationship and that they would work alongside of us to destroy, deny resources to, and have al-Qaeda depart from that place.
Do you regret giving the Taliban that legitimacy? Do you regret pressing the Afghan government to release 5,000 prisoners, which they did, some of whom are now back on the battlefield fighting with the Taliban?
Chris, you make peace with your enemies. The statement that I made that day was absolutely true. You can ask the military leaders on the ground. We did good work to crush al-Qaeda. When we left office, there were fewer than 200 al-Qaeda left in Afghanistan. Chris, we never trusted the Taliban. You can ask them yourselves. We made abundantly clear if they did not live up to that piece of paper, to the words that they had put on the ground, we weren't going to allow them to just walk away from any deal that they'd struck. We were going to go crush them. We were going to go impose real costs on them. We weren't going to let them take these provincial capitals. They understood that American power was going to come to their village, to their community, to the friends and family around them, and we were going to make sure that they understood America wasn't going to allow Americans to be killed from this place. We didn't take the word of the Taliban. We watched their actions on the ground when they did the right thing and they helped us against terror. That was all good. And when they didn't, we crushed them.
This is Fox News' Chris Wallace holding Trump's former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's feet to the fire over his complicity in the situation unfolding in Afghanistan right now. And there are a few important pieces of background to acknowledge here, while these Trump acolytes try to rewrite history. First of all, remember when Trump tried to invite the Taliban to Camp David during the anniversary of 9/11? As if that wasn't bad enough in and of itself? That was just one step in many of what the Trump White House characterized as a peace deal with the Taliban. Only it wasn't so much a peace deal as it was a withdrawal agreement, which set the terms for a complete departure by US troops from Afghanistan by May of 2021. The Afghan government wasn't even involved. How do you make a peace deal between two sides when one of those sides isn't even at the table? And beyond that, the US sitting down with the Taliban did exactly what Chris Wallace noted here. It legitimized them. Again, the Afghan government wasn't even present. And what did the US get from this deal? Both Trump and Pompeo defended the deal as including a, quote, conditions-based withdrawal. But when the US started winding down our troop presence without any of the conditions actually being met, it became clear that there were no conditions. There were no enforcement mechanisms. There were no penalties. Just a handshake from a president whose literary claim to fame is that his name is on the byline of a book entitled Art of the Deal. Only just like everything else, he didn't make a deal, he got rolled. And what did the Taliban get? Well, first of all, a runway to reassume power, which we're seeing play out right now. And aside from that, consider this. In 2018, Trump released at least 5,000 Taliban prisoners, including Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar. In 2020, Trump's Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, met with Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar. And now, in 2021, Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar is set to become the president of Afghanistan under Taliban rule. So if Mike Pompeo is dishing out blame, let's not forget that Trump literally released the Taliban leader from prison. Mike Pompeo met with him as Secretary of State, and now the guy will likely become the president of Afghanistan under Taliban control. So as much as Pompeo and the alumni of the Trump White House want to pretend that somehow this 20-year Afghanistan situation started and ended in the 7 months that Biden's been president, their gaslighting isn't going to work here. Now, all of that aside, a few points. First of all, no, this didn't start with Joe Biden, and in fairness, it didn't start with Donald Trump either. This entire effort is the result of 4 presidential terms spanning both parties, where apparently our entire involvement can be reduced to barely holding up a house of cards, because the moment we left, the Taliban was able to take over. That tells us a lot. It tells us that we shouldn't be out in the Middle East nation building because we clearly can't. It tells us that we wasted 20 years and $2 trillion and have little to nothing to show for it. It tells us that we need to learn how to cut our losses early instead of digging in our heels in what is clearly a failed effort. And most importantly, it tells us that Biden did the right thing by finishing this now, because the only thing worse than a 20-year war is a 21-year war. Now, with that said, the way this ended in terms of evacuations was disastrous. Joe Biden is the president, and as he himself conceded, the buck stops with him. We should not have been in a situation where Americans and Afghans were and are continuing to scramble to escape a country that fell to the Taliban. The images of Afghans clinging onto an American C-17 are indelible in our minds and serve as a testament not only to the desperation of Afghans whose lives are now in immediate danger, but the US's failure to adequately prepare. In terms of where those 86,000 Afghans go or what happens next, I'll admit that I don't know, but I can say that no solution is unacceptable. You don't spend 20 years in a foreign country and yet not manage to have any semblance of a responsible evacuation plan, which, by the way, Joe Biden himself acknowledged.
Let me lay out the current mission in Afghanistan. I was asked to authorize, and I did, 6,000 U.S. troops to deploy to Afghanistan for the purpose of assisting in the departure of U.S. and allied civilian personnel from Afghanistan, and to evacuate our Afghan allies and vulnerable Afghans to safety outside of Afghanistan. Our troops are working to secure the airfield and to ensure continued operation of both the civilian and military flights. We're taking over air traffic control. We have safely shut down our embassy and transferred our diplomats. Our diplomatic presence is now consolidated at the airport as well. Over the coming days, we intend to transport out thousands of American citizens who've been living and working in Afghanistan. We'll also continue to support the safe departure of civilian personnel, the civilian personnel of our allies who are still serving in Afghanistan. Operation Allies Refugee, which I announced back in July, has already moved 2,000 Afghans who are eligible for special immigration visas and their families to the United States. In the coming days, the U.S. military will provide assistance to move more SIV-eligible Afghans and their families out of Afghanistan. We're also expanding refugee access to cover other vulnerable Afghans who worked for our embassy, U.S. non-governmental agencies, or U.S. non-governmental organizations, and Afghans who otherwise are at great risk, in U.S. news agencies. I know there are concerns about why we did not begin evacuating Afghans civilians sooner. Part of the answer is some of the Afghans did not want to leave earlier, still hopeful for their country. And part of it because the Afghan government and its supporters discouraged us from organizing a mass exodus to avoid triggering, as they said, a crisis of confidence.
So are the failures here obvious? Yes. But does the guy deserve credit for owning up to it and working to find a correct course of action moving forward? Of course. So it's certainly fair to criticize, but let's be honest here, this is a no-win situation. And you might disagree with me, and that's okay, but it was time to leave. Something that most Americans, regardless of political affiliation, agree with. Anyone born after the year 2001 has only ever lived in a country at war. There's something to be said for changing that. If you enjoyed that video and you're looking for a deeper dive, check out my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen. It's a no BS look at the top stories of the week, along with interviews with the top names in politics, like Vice President Kamala Harris, Jen Psaki, Elizabeth Warren, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Katie Porter, Pete Buttigieg, and more. Again, that's No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, available anywhere you listen to podcasts. Also, if you want to see more videos like this one, click the subscribe link right here on this screen to join the more than 1 million people who've already subscribed to my channel. And finally, to donate to my Don't Be a Mitch fund, where I'm raising money for a whole raft of different voter outreach and voter registration groups in the closest states ahead of midterms in 2022, including Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Texas. You can find that link on this screen as well. Thanks for watching.